How healthy is your marriage? And as a man, how committed are you to making sure that everything is tightened up to ensure that your partner feels heard, respected, and valued? And how invested are you to ensure that your thoughts, feelings, and emotions are considered? According to my friends at the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy, they found that the marriage counseling success rate is approximately 70%. The selection of your therapist is key because, depending on their selection, you can often find a higher sense of emotional well-being. Through marriage counseling, with the large majority of couples who participate leaving satisfied, and according to a new Gallup poll, a happier life after getting married doesn't just need to be in the fairy tales. Adults who are married report being happier than any other couples in any other status of a relationship, the poll found. From 2009 to 2023, 2.5 million couples across the United States were asked to rank the quality of their lives, with 0 being the lowest possible rating and 10 being the highest. Then, the researchers asked respondents what their typical level of happiness would be within the next 5 years. The survey found that married people consistently reported being happier than their unmarried counterparts, at a clip of 12 to 24% higher, depending on the year. For my friend Angelo Santiago, he's a men's marriage and relationship coach who specializes in helping men who feel stuck in their marriage but unsure on what to do next. He helps men understand that when a marriage or relationship is in trouble, it's important to ask and come to your partner with a request rather than a complaint. His goal is to teach men the relationship skills they never learned, and how holding back on applying these skills can have a negative effect on your relationship. His work is rooted in relational life therapy and years of leading global men's events, where he focuses on emotional intelligence, embodiment, and relational connections. And he joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Angelo, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn how you help men become better husbands. Happy Monday to you, my friend, and it's always great to see you, buddy.
Yeah, it's really good to be here, and I love talking about this work. I love helping men out. I love helping everybody out to have solid relationships, because as humans, we are such relational beings that this is like a key part of who we are and how we thrive and how we succeed in life. And so why not have these conversations?
Absolutely. And my friend, I know that you're a relationship men's coach who help men who believe that they're stuck in their marriages, but they are unable or unsure on how to express their emotions or do what's necessary to communicate what they need in a marriage, my friend. So tell me about your work, my friend, and what makes you so fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is that I've worked with men for several years now on a variety of topics. And I've also kind of gone through my own journey. And what I've found in both my own case and in the case of the men that I've worked with, that when it comes to relationships, that's like the best let's say like barometer of how life is going, like how we're interacting with others, whether it's our spouse, our loved ones, our romantic partners, or even our children or people we just interact with on a day-to-day basis. It's like our relationality shows us like how good we are with ourselves, like how in tune we are with our own emotions, how in tune we are with our physical bodies, with our our soul, our spirit, all those things. And so as I've continued this work with men, I really found a place where I thrive in helping men and I see the results immediately, and that's in marriages. Now, I specifically work with married men, but what I'm going to share today and what I'm happy to share about on my podcast as well, goes across, just marriage lines. It's relationships, it's family members, it's people you work with, all this thing can be applied. And so it's all about bringing men towards connection and intimacy in different ways and fulfillment in their lives. Because as men, we're brought up in a very like hyper competitive, hyper individualistic culture for most of us. And so we never learn the skills of how to be relational, of how to listen, of how to speak to somebody, of how to not get defensive, as how to be vulnerable and put down our guards sometimes. And learning those skills and actually applying them and seeing the challenges that you face when applying them can absolutely transform many aspects of your life. And in the work that I do, can transform your marriage, where both people in the partnership feel like they're moving in the right direction. They're coming closer together. They're happier. And that's my goal, is to just help men have a healthy, thriving, exciting, loving relationships.
Yeah, and Angela, can I ask you about a man's upbringing? You know, a lot of the time, men have this view on masculinity, or how they have to show up in the world because of their upbringing, whether they've been brought up in a home of two parents, a single mother, or no parents at all. And I'm curious, how do you think your sort of your upbringing dynamics affect your ability to build thriving relationships? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love that question, and you're spot on. Depending on how we are raised as boys and as young men, really has a huge effect as to how we become men and how we are in our relationships, how we are as parents, how we are as friends. And regardless whether you were born into a family of, a two-parent household or a single-parent household, maybe you were raised by your grandparents, maybe you were raised by foster parents or adopted, of course, it can be anything. However, we as children, we always look up to those who are our parent figures, right? Like who hold that archetype of mother and father, regardless of who it is. And we either choose to emulate what we see, right? If they're doing something that either we deem to be good or it seems like it's productive and it's like getting them somewhere, we might emulate that thing. Or we might see them do something and do the complete opposite of that thing because we didn't like it. Maybe our parents were abusive to us. And I'll make the statement of like, I will never be like my father. I will never do to my child what was done to me, right? And so I'm going to do the complete opposite. Whatever it may be, what we see as kids has a huge effect. And so when I talk about that, we've never really learned the skills of how to be relational, it's true because we come into relationship with the knowledge base of what we experienced, what we witnessed, what we saw in our parents or whoever were our figures that were kind of teaching us the way of relationship. So if I grew up in a household, and this is true for me, where my parents, I never saw them fight. It doesn't mean that everything was always 100% wonderful, but they just would never actually be in any sort of confrontation. And so when I got into my marriage, I was very scared of confrontation. When things weren't going well, I was like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to face this. I don't want to talk about it. Let's pretend like it's not happening, because that's how I grew up. Other people might have grown up in a family where their parents fought a lot and there was a lot of raised voices and anger. And so that's how they deal with confrontation, right? And so, yes, absolutely, how we grow up has a huge effect into how we show up in our marriage.
Yeah, and I know, Angelo, your work, and you're on a mission to help men really tap into their emotional intelligence. And I know the large part of your work is rooted in relational therapy, my friend. So let's talk about emotional intelligence and uh, the steps you need to take to apply the relationship skills to build and maintain thriving relationships. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things I like to teach men about their relationships and their partnerships, I want them to be really attuned to their partner. And I want them to be attuned in the sense of like trying to understand what their partner is feeling, what their partner is experiencing. But before you that's like too many steps ahead. Before we can even attune to somebody else's emotions, we have to be checked in with our own emotions. And for a lot of men, myself included, when I first got into this work, I had a hard time even admitting that I felt certain emotions. I really numbed out and dampened down and kind of clogged up any sort of anger or shame or sadness. These weren't emotions that I liked, and so I didn't want to feel them, and so I kind of pushed them away. And whether I use substances or busyness to keep me away from it, I had to learn how to get comfortable with those emotions, because since I couldn't be with my own sadness or anger or any of that, I couldn't be with when my wife was feeling anger. When she felt anger, I shut down because I would shut down to my own anger. And so for a lot of men who didn't grow up in a culture, a society, a family, a household where emotions were talked about, maybe they were looked as less than, right? Like we are a happy family. We don't talk about grief or sadness, no matter what that means. Some of my work includes just helping men remember their emotions and take away this idea that there are good emotions and bad emotions. There are just emotions, and we have to be open to feeling them. We have to be open to being able to express them, right? Whether it is tears, whether it is some sort of physicality in a safe way that's not put on any other people, but just to actually like move our bodies and release that emotion. And then to look at those emotions and be like, okay, why is this showing up for me? Like, what is the lesson here? What is it asking me to do more of or less of, or talk more about or talk less about? Like, there is a whole road of emotional intelligence that most men have not experienced. And honestly, sometimes you get into working with a client and he might just say, "Hey, I just want things with my wife to get better. Tell me what I need to do." And when I start having this conversation about emotional intelligence, sometimes that's a scarier thing than actually having the confrontation with, his wife, or the conversation with his wife that needs to happen. Let's look at your own emotional intelligence first. And doing that in a space that's safe enough, but also kind of pushes you along, that's a little bit uncomfortable, is the right place to do that work.
Yeah, and Angelo, I'm curious to ask you, how do you think we can help men start better conversations with their wives when things aren't going as well in a marriage? Because, some men aren't natural communicators. So what do you think is the key to starting conversations, my friend, to build thriving relationships? What are your thoughts there?
The first piece of advice I want to give anyone who's listening here, and this is for men, for women, for whoever is in a relationship, whether it is a marriage, whether it is a coworker or a friend, when you are going to get into let's say, a challenging conversation, something that may be a little uncomfortable, the best thing you can do is just take a deep breath and slow down. The enemy of confrontational conversations is going too fast and getting into that kind of activated, charged trigger response where our brain is just in that fight flight mentality, where we're just either going to be pushing back, or we're going to get defensive, or we're going to say like, well, you think I did this, this is what you did. We're blaming, we're shaming, we're doing all the things that are what I would call in my practice, that from what I've learned in a program called relational life therapy, as losing strategies. Like, these are losing strategies that we want to stop doing, and we want to move towards the winning strategies. And the best thing you can do is first take a deep breath, calm down that reactive self, and then try to see how open you can be to whatever the conversation is about. Whether the conversation is somebody telling you about something that you did that they didn't like, can you just listen to them? Can you, and this is something I talk about on my podcast, Better Husband, can you yield instead of defend, right? Allow them to say what they need to say. Allow yourself to listen to them. Allow yourself to try to understand why the thing that you did made them, feel you in that specific way. Because this isn't about saying who's right or who's wrong, or saying that my pain is more than your pain. This is about trying to find commonality and coming together to help each other. When my wife comes to me with a problem, especially if it's about me, my role is to try and help her, because I love her, because I want her to feel better. I want to understand her better. And if there's something I can do to help her in that moment, I want to do that thing. Now, I want to stress this, that with all these things, when it comes to a relationship, like, it's easier said than done. I'm not perfect in any way. Nobody I've ever worked with is perfect in any way. Nobody I've ever learned from is perfect in every way. We are humans. We make mistakes. The important thing is when we make those mistakes, how do we come back and repair? How do we come back into connection?
Yeah, and Angelo, I'm also curious to ask you about, taking ownership of your marriage and relationships, because I'm a big believer in that you can't have expectations for anyone else until you sort of take ownership of your own life, right? So talk to me about ownership and taking personal accountability. How big is that in relationships, my friend?
That's huge. The fact that I only work with one side of the relationship, I work with men specifically, and the people who do the work that I do, they do couples work as well. Some people work with just women. But when I work with just the man in a relationship, and I'm hearing about what's going on, the relational dynamic, the thing that's going on in the couples, the only thing that we can do in our work together is what I call take care of our side of the street. Right, is for us to show up in the best way possible, to own our actions, to own our words, to own the things that we do or don't do in our relationship. And we can't control or have any expectation of how that will be received or what will come of it in the relationship. But I am a firm believer, like you just said, I agree with you completely, Kevin, is that when you take ownership of your part, of your life, of your actions, of your thoughts, of your words, it has a ripple effect on everything around you. And when you're in that romantic relationship, the effect that it has on the ecosystem of the marriage will shift everything, whether it invites your partner to take a look at their part, or whether it invites them to just get a little bit more curious about you and the changes that you're making. And maybe they want to make some changes too. Maybe you want to make some changes together. All of these things can happen when you, as the individual, take your part and own everything that is in your capacity. And of course, that isn't everything. You can't control anyone, nor should you ever try. You can just take care of yourself, and that will have an effect on your marriage.
Yeah, and for my next two questions, Angelo, these are statistical findings I want to get your opinion on. So the first of them comes from our friends over at LinkedIn, buddy, that say that 40% of marriages in the United States typically end up in divorce, and an additional 10 to 15% of couples separate without divorcing, and 7% stay together but are chronically unhappy. And when they were asked why they were unhappy or divorcing or separating. They said a lack of communication and understanding and awareness, my friend. So I'm curious to get your opinion on those statistics. How do you think we can improve the communication style of men specifically to improve marriages, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and that's a statistic that I keep praying that and working towards making a shift. Like I want to see marriages succeed because even in my own journey, I was at one point on the brink of divorce with my wife, and we changed that trajectory through a lot of work, and communication was one of the big pieces. I'll own up to my part always, and that was before I learned more about myself and started doing the work that I needed to. I was a withdrawer. I was closed off. Anytime, like I said, things would get difficult, I would shut down. Even if I was, you know, 2 inches away from my wife, my emotional self and my cognitive self were gone. I was closed off, and that's because I never learned how to communicate in what I would say like a stressful situation. And most men never do. We learn to take action. Most men, when there's stress, when there's something uncomfortable, we think to ourselves, how can I stop feeling this way? How can I fix the situation that's happening? Not how can I talk about it? Not how can I listen to somebody about it, right? It's like, let's do something about it. And so when you try to open up to communication in that state of stress, it turns into defensiveness, it turns into shutting down, it turns into pushing away, it turns into breaking connection. And if anything is going to lead to divorce and an unhappy marriage, whether you stay together or break up, is a lack of connection, right? If the person you're with does not feel like they can talk to you, then what are you together for? Right? If they want to come to you with a problem, if they want to come to you with a concern, if they want to come to you with for a need for help, and you are uncomfortable with that idea, then you're not going to be in a strong partnership. Like that is a key aspect of intimacy. And so learning how to communicate, specifically in stressful situation where you may be triggered or uncomfortable or want to take action instead of listening, is a key part in the work that I do. A lot of the times when we not only listening, but also when we want something, when we need something, a lot of the times we come in with a complaint. The complaint would be like, hey, why didn't you do this thing? Or like, oh, you always do it this way. I've asked you all these times. And that's not a positive way of having a communication. Instead, what I teach is come in with a request, not a complaint, right? And that is a quick little shift in your communication tactics that will bring you closer together. It's not about blaming. It's just about like, hey, could you do this for me? As a favor to me, would you XYZ? Right? Would you make sure that door stays closed because it's cold outside? Would you give me a call if you're going to be home late so I know, that I need to keep dinner warm or whatever it may be? Come in with a request instead of a complaint.
Yeah, and the other statistical question I had for you was, Bloomberg News tells me that 17.88% of U.S. households were only headed by people who were married and had kids under the age of 18. And common reasons for divorce, according to Bloomberg, included commitment, infidelity, and conflict issues. So my question is, what did you think of that number of only about 17% of households staying together because of the kids? And what do you think is the key to rebuilding trust in relationships? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, in my belief is that there is always a path to rebuilding trust in a relationship, whether it comes from infidelity, whether it comes from any sort of small breaks in trust to large breaks in trust. There is always a path towards rebuilding and strengthening the marriage and getting from a place of where you were to where you can be. Now, it's not easy. And the other thing is that both people need to be invested in a desire to rebuild that trust and committed to making the change. Absolutely. It is something that you would have to prioritize as the number one most important thing in your life. If you're on the brink of divorce, it's either do the work and prioritize it or make the decision that maybe this marriage wasn't meant to work out. If you want to do the work, then, that includes seeking support, whether it's from someone like me, like a coach or a therapist, or reading books together, doing courses together. There's so much opportunity, but you have to treat it as the most important thing in your life. And a lot of the time when I work with people, I ask them the question, it's just like, why do you want to do this? Like, why is this important to you? What is driving you forward? And the answer, kind of, you mentioned in the statistics, a lot of the time there's children involved. And they want to repair so that their kids can grow in a healthy household. But the one thing I don't like to see is parents who are saying, well, we're going to just stay together until the kids go to college or until they're a certain age, whatever, because you're still exposing your kids to a very toxic environment if you're not looking to actually rebuild that trust and actually come back together. You're not doing them any favors. And so the question I always ask is, okay, do both of you want to rebuild this marriage? Do you acknowledge the fact that where you were and where you've been is not a place that you can go back to? You have to go somewhere completely new. And that's going to involve doing a lot of hard work. It's going to involve looking at your part of the street, right? Like, how can I keep my side of the street clean? Look at where we've been falling short. Look at, what apologies need to be made. Look at acceptance of, what the past has been and moving forward. Because you can't carry that resentment along with you. There is, all I want to kind of really focus in on what you're saying is, I truly believe that there's always a path forward if both people want it and if they're willing to do the hard work.
Yeah, and one of those ways we do that is by active listening, as you said before. So I want to drill down on what exactly active listening means. I know you said earlier that you come in with a request instead of a complaint, my friend, but tell me about active listening and what does it really mean to be an active listener in a relationship? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, the active listening is an interesting word because it's often said and people think they understand, but it's not something that we do naturally. As social beings, for most of us, as we're listening to a conversation, somebody's talking to us, a lot of the times we're thinking like, okay, what am I going to say next? What am I going to add to this conversation? How can I either make this funny, or how can I add to the interest of what we're talking about? Or how can I share a little bit about myself? Right? Like, this is more, we're going outwards. The importance of active listening is just being open and receptive, is really taking in the person across from you with total attention. That means for me, when I have, very important conversation with my wife, the phone goes away, like in another room, or it's out of my pocket. I don't wear a watch that's going to buzz when a notification comes on, because that's taking away my attention. So that's one tip. A second one is, be curious about what the person across from you is saying. Like, really listen to understand. And if you don't understand something, ask a question about it. Get more clarity about what they're trying to tell you. That's active listening. Another great exercise that I teach men, and this applies for everyone, once again, not just in married men, this is for all relationships and all interactions, is what's called reflective listening. And once I hear someone share something with me, especially that's very important, I take it in, I take a moment, and then I reflect back to them exactly what I heard them say. Be like, hey, what I heard you say is that when I, came home late, you were really upset. You had done all this work to have a really nice evening for us, and I wasn't there. I didn't show up on time, and it made you lose trust in me. And now what you really need from me is to hear why I was late and what I'm going to do next time if I'm going to be late, right? Like, this is me giving you back exactly what you told me. And then the best question at the end of that is like, did I get that right, or did I miss anything, right? That helps the person who's sharing really feel heard. And that is such a huge part of communication. So that reflective listening is something you can practice. And let me just tell you this, you don't have to be perfect at it. right? This is about progress, not perfection. If you try it and you miss something or you mislabel something, that person's going to have the opportunity, if you ask that question, did I get that right, to clear it up and then be like, oh, okay, I got it now. What you actually meant was this. And this is about just trying to be better. It's not trying to be perfect. So to be a great active listener, really give all your attention to the person that you're speaking to and be curious about them, ask them questions, have them be the most important thing that's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, I'm curious to dive in to how you rectified your own marriage, my friend, because I think the best quality for a coach is to be relational and to be relatable to the people that they're helping. So tell me, what was the process of turning the key to your own marriage around, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about it because I'm just so proud of it. I'm proud to where I am in my marriage right now. And this is not, something that I'm trying to make it sound better than it is. Like, I really am in probably the best place I've ever been in my marriage with my wife, as a father, as somebody, the work that I'm doing. I just really feel good about it all. And so the story that got me here is such a key aspect to it. So just to take us way back, my wife and I met in college, well over 2 decades ago. We've known each other at this point longer than half of our life. So we have been very different people in our 20s and our 30s and now in our 40s. We have changed and evolved a lot. And sometimes we evolved together and changed together. And sometimes we changed separately and kind of drifted apart. And in kind of the most apart we've ever been was right around the same time that our son was born, which was, and at the same time that the COVID lockdowns happened. We were in Northern California at the time, so there were wildfires going on. Like, the stress levels in our individual life were maximized, and we were as distant as we had ever been as before. And that just led to more pain, more conflict, more challenges. We were truly unhappy. We were hiding in our own kind of worlds from each other, even though we lived together, right? Like, we had this like companionship marriage. We weren't really intimate. We weren't really connected. We weren't really in love in the same way that we were when we first met. I mean, the love was still there. We had just kind of closed ourselves off to each other. And we were headed down the path that kind of I described before, the path of divorce. We were on the brink. We were near the end. Like, it had gotten too much and we didn't know what was going to happen. And I give my wife all the credit for this, that she was the one that was strong enough and courageous enough to kind of rock the boat. And in any relationship, if things aren't going the way that you want them to go, you have to be courageous enough to rock the boat and to ask for what you want. And that's exactly what she did. And how she did that was in a very loving way, but still in a confrontational way. It was recommend that I go get help, that I go in our specific story, it was to going to an in-person men's retreat, which later on, after I've gone, I went and facilitated and led a lot of those retreats, which are life-changing. But in my journey, I went to this, I connected with other men. I learned some about the stuff that we're talking about here: emotional intelligence, communication, owning our part, our story, ourselves, getting more in touch of what we want in our lives, all these things, and confronting a lot of like the darker stuff in our lives, like the challenges that we had growing up, actions that we were taking that were out of integrity, all these things, and receiving love, support, and accountability. And through that work, I came back home and made drastic changes and continued to get support, whether that was coaching that I received, going to therapy, continuing the work that I did in men's groups, learning more, reading the books, doing the online seminars, all these things. Like, I made it my mission to change my way of life. And what happened because of it is that my marriage improved, my relationship with my wife improved, my understanding of how to be a good man and a good father just expanded, and I started showing up for life in a way that felt right. And since then, my path has been to continue doing that. My number one priority is my family, and I also want to help other men achieve this, because if I talk to myself 5 years ago, I would not have believed that this was possible. I had this story that you know what, like life is hard. You're supposed to work hard, and sometimes you're unhappy, and that's just the way it is. And nothing I can do is going to change that. And I bought into this story of kind of, acceptable misery. And I'm here to tell anybody who's listening who's bought into that story that that isn't the case. You can have the dream life that you want if you're willing to work for it and put in the effort, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your work, whether it's in your parenting, friendships, whatever it may be, it's all possible. I just want to be a voice for those that need to be heard. I want to be there to support men wherever they are, however good their marriage is, that they want to be better, or however challenging and possibly even on the brink of divorce, moment, to get them on the right path.
Yeah, one of the ways we do this is making sure that there is what I call an intimacy agreement, because it's important to be intimate with your partner to maintain a thriving marriage. But how important is it, do you think, that couples need to be on the same page when it comes to intimacy, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think number one is yes, you always want to be on the same page with your partner in so many aspects of life. And the only way to do that is through communication. That brings us back to our earlier conversation of like how to have those conversations. But then I also want to stress that, there are different categories of intimacy. And I just made a podcast episode on my podcast called Better Husband about this one. And it's not just about, right, a lot of times when people talk about intimacy, they think about sexual intimacy. And that is one of those categories. But there's emotional intimacy, which is about sharing feelings and being vulnerable, creating a safe space for communication, right? There's physical, non-sexual intimacy, like, touch and hugging and cuddling, holding hands. Like there's that level of closeness and trust that gets built. There's relational intimacy about how you work together and build trust and really demonstrate that you're on the same team. And there's intellectual intimacy, which is about sharing thoughts, ideas, and having meaningful conversations and curiosities. And then there's spiritual intimacy, which is about values, beliefs, life purpose, which can be faith-based or personal growth-based, whatever it is that you are together. But like in all these categories, you have to be in connection with your partner about it. It's great to have that conversation about, what is it that you desire in this category of intimacy? You want to be aligned in that together. And that's going to create a roadmap for your partnership about how you're going to stay close. And whenever one of these categories is too like far gone, like maybe, sometimes I work with men where they're sharing with me that there is no sexual intimacy in their marriage. Instead of me focusing deeply on that, be like, okay, well, let's look at the other places. Is this intimacy as a whole that's missing in your marriage that needs to be, patched up and taken care of before we get to the point of sexual intimacy? Because we can only get there if there is that level of trust and connection with both partners. And so I really always encourage men that I work with to take a look at that list and even have the conversation with their partners about like, which one of these do you feel like is lacking most? And what are some things I can do to improve that, right? That's the beautiful thing about relationships that we sometimes don't do is we never ask the partners, like, how can I do something better for you? Instead, we try to mind read or we try to guess what they want. And most of the time we get it wrong. Whereas if we were just willing to be vulnerable and tell them, I don't actually know how to do this, but I want to, will you help me by telling me? If that partner is open to it, which I hope they would be, they can give you exactly the step-by-step guide on how to give them what they want. And that, I think, goes into what you're talking about in terms of intimacy agreements. It's like in having that conversation about what they want and what I want. Are we on the same page in this? Can we respect each other's boundaries and limits and also give each other what we want? That's all a beautiful part of that agreement.
Yeah, and Angelo, I'm curious to ask you about breaking down the barrier or the stigma when you work with men specifically about therapy in general, because unless you're really invested in the therapy process, it's really not effective. So when you work with men who are hesitant to enter relational therapy, I'm curious, the conversations that you have for them to sort of encourage them to break down their barriers to having an authentic process. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I spoke a little bit earlier about for me getting curious with the men who want to work with me or who are kind of curious or they want to learn more is I get to the question of it's like, well, why do you want this, right? And if the answer is like, well, my partner told me I should, that's not for me. That's not enough. Okay, they told you you should, and you're taking the right steps. So I want to talk to the part of you that said, yes, I want to do this because they told me I should. What does that part of you want? Right? There needs to be something driving you forward because you're right. And I can, from my own story, looking back early on in our marriage when things weren't going well, my wife, like many wives, throughout the world, dragged me into a couples therapy situation, and yet I was totally closed off to the idea. I wasn't happy to be there. I didn't want anything to do with it. I wasn't really open and honest about what was going on in the therapy. I just kind of wanted to get through it. And when I did that, no change happens. Like, it's like a temporary little band-aid. Nothing really happens. And so for men who are hesitant to step into that, then it's like, I can't I can't change anything for you that you don't want to change for yourself. I can't want this for you more than you want it for yourself. I can't be more invested in your marriage than you are, but I can be as invested. I can want it as much as you. I can help you as much as you want to be helped, but you have to lead. And so I'll have that conversation with them and try and talk to the part of them that really wants the change. Right? Like, yes, there's another part of them that doesn't, might think this is all BS or might not be interested in putting in the hard work to do this. It's like, okay, I'll acknowledge that part of you exists, but I want to talk to the part of you that wants a change, that is willing to take the change, that's willing to get uncomfortable, that's willing to do this for the long haul, because that's what this process is. It's not like, let me give you 3 things that you need to do and overnight your marriage is going to change. That's not the case. And so, if you are hesitant for therapy or coaching or any sort of a relational work, get curious about that for yourself. Like, why? Like, what is the story that you've made up that this isn't possible for you, or this isn't going to work, or, maybe for somebody else it would, but not for me.
Absolutely. And Angelo, I've got a trio of questions left for you. And the first of those 3, my friend, is if I asked you to stand in a room of 100 newly married men and I told you it was your responsibility to share your top keys or top 3 keys to building and experiencing a healthy and thriving marriage, I'm wondering what those 3 keys would be and why, my friend.
Yeah, I think, the first thing to understand in marriage and in any relationship is that it is a phase of harmony, disharmony, and repair. The happily ever after story is not real life. It is a fairy tale. And it doesn't mean that things can't be happy, but no matter how good of a relationship you're in and how much you love each other, your partner will do something, or you will do something that will kind of fracture that little moment of just bliss and harmony. And it may be big, it may be tiny. But when those things happen, it's all about repair. And so we've learned, we feel it when we're in that harmony phase, and we feel it when we're in that disharmony phase. But for most of us, we never learned how to repair. And that is such a key piece. It is the most important piece in a healthy relationships that we never learned. And so my encouragement to this room of men is to get curious about learning repair tactics, about how to have new skills that help you communicate better, that help you listen better, that help you cherish your partner, that help you really look at your side of the street, all the things that we've talked about. Treat this as much as, with as much attention as you would your physical health or your spiritual health or your desires to succeed in business, right? Like, give your marriage that much attention. The second one, because we're talking about men and we talked about this earlier, is get in touch with your emotional intelligence, your emotional awareness. Learn how to talk about emotions, learn how to understand emotions, learn what they mean. Because that's not something that is common for many men. And the more you can be in touch with yourself, the more you can be in touch with your partner. And in doing that, you're really going to give them possibly what they want in a partner, because partnerships at this point, marriages aren't just about companionship and financial, commitments. Like, it is about intimacy, which is what we talked about. And then lastly, it kind of goes along the lines with this last one, is I want these men to really focus on their own growth and their own evolution. Because marriage, I believe, is for your entire life. And you are going to change as a human, whether you get married in your 20s and you're together till your 80s. There's a lot that's going to change, and trying to stay the same is never going to work. Be open to learning new things, be open to new experiences, be open to doing that in your partnership, in your relationship, but be open to doing that for yourself. Focus on your growth and your willingness to try new things, no matter how uncomfortable they may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Angelo, I have to be honest, I'm not married, but one of the things that, sort of get under my skin about relationships is when I hear people say, if we can only get married, things will change. And now I believe that you accept people for who they are and you try to strengthen them and trying to improve on the person that they are. But if you go into the mindset of marriage with, if only I can change this person after we get married, I don't think marriages can ultimately be successful. And I'm curious to get your thought on that notion as well.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with you. Let me make this very, very clear. You cannot change your partner. Like, you cannot control them. You cannot force them to do anything they don't want to do. That's just not, I mean, trying to do so in certain ways, like, is abuse, right? So that's not something that you should ever do. But what you can do is you can inspire your partner. You can lead in your partnership with your own vulnerability and your own desire to have a better relationship, and keeping your side of the street clean, and encouraging them as best you can to do what they must do. And then you have to let go of outcome, right? You have to be able to show empathy. You have to be able to connect to what they're going through, what experiences they're having in life that maybe you can't personally relate to, but you can try and put yourself in their shoes. And sometimes, like, I'll be honest, I'm not here to say that all marriages are meant to work out. Like, there are some that it is not meant to be. And there has to come an acceptance to that too. And yet I don't want people to give up too soon. There it has to be a level of acceptance of your partner, but it doesn't mean tolerating any unhealthy behavior. And I spoke to, abuse, but also, any sort of things that are harmful to their health or their well-being that you want better for them, but they're unwilling to make any changes. You have to be open to the fact that you can't stop them. But you can encourage them. You can help them. You can ask them what support they need. You can be accountability for them, right? And so that's how we can support each other. It's about supporting each other towards the change that the person wants to make. And that's really my job as a coach too. Like, I can't control the person I'm working with. I can't change the person I'm working with, but I can help them make the changes that they want so that the changes in their marriage happens. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about the men in the room, right? Focus on your own growth, and the relational dynamic can shift, and that is possible. And again, I can just look back at my own story of where I was before, and my inability to communicate, and how closed off I was, and how challenged I was. And on a bad day, I still struggle at times, and yet I am not anywhere close to the man I used to be. I'm more evolved. I'm more open. I understand things better. I have better communication. I have more intimacy. I have more vulnerability in my partnership with my wife. And those are all amazing things that she had always wanted. And she knew that she couldn't give me those things, but she could encourage me and help me find them on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. And Angelo, my final question for you, buddy, has to do with life and legacy. You know, if I threw you a lifetime achievement party at the end of your life, and I asked you to select your best friend or the family members who knew you best, my friend, and I asked them to give them a toast about your life and legacy, what do you hope they would say, and how do you want your legacy from both a personal and professional standpoint to be defined, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I mean, that's such a beautiful thing to think about, Kevin. And when I think about personally, I just want my legacy to be of a loving husband and father, like somebody who cared enough to make drastic changes in his own life, to do the right thing, to make an impact on just my small little circle. Right, like my wife and my son, and possibly any other children that we may have, or my son's children if he chooses to have them. Somebody who was a light towards what is possible, that we don't have to live the same old story that we've been fed of, men being a certain way or fathers being this or not being that. Really bringing more love and connection and just more emotionality into my family life. And I hope that they feel my love and they feel my presence in all of that. Professionally, I just want to leave a legacy behind of somebody who helped men transform their marriages, that shifted statistics. And it doesn't have to be on a global scale, but like of the people who I do interact with, can I feel confident that changes are happening in lives because of conversations I'm having, because of content I'm sharing on my podcast, because of interviews like this that we're doing. I want to be somebody who is teaching men the skills that they need to thrive relationally, because that has an impact on children. It has an impact on communities. It has an impact on anybody that this person or that family might mentor or take care of. Honestly, I just go back all the way to the beginning and when we first started talking. Humans are relational beings. Like we thrive in connection with each other. And to me, relationships are the foundation of having a really meaningful life. And my core belief and message is that it's never too late to learn how to improve the relationships you have or the relationships you would like to have in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, my friend, tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the most effective way they can do that?
Yeah, if you want to learn some of the most important skills that I teach my clients, you can go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com and download a free PDF where I teach 3 really critical skills. That's betterhusbandtoolkit.com. You can also check out my podcast simply called Better Husband with Angelo Santiago. And then once you get in touch with me there, you'll see my website. You can book a 30-minute consultation with me to see how I can support you. And I have a lot more exciting things coming in 2025 that I'm excited to share with anybody who's interested. And so whether you are a man trying to answer the question, how can I be a better husband? Or if you love a man who you think could benefit from answering that question, send them to me. You can go to my website to angelosantiago.com.
Well, fabulous, Angelo. This has been a wide-ranging and thorough conversation about relationships, love, and everything in between, my friend. I really respect the work that you do to strengthen men's relationships with relationships, my friend. And I want to thank you for engaging in conversation and for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Kevin, thank you so much. It's been amazing having this conversation. Thank you for all the work that you do in putting this together. And I'm excited to hopefully spread this message all around the world for those that need to hear it.